Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. When the Clone Wars came out almost 2 decades ago, I remember thinking just how terrible the animation was and how boring the story seemed. But over the years, the animation got a lot better, and the characters started developing, and I became more invested in the overall story. By the time the 7th season of the Clone Wars finished, the TV series had solidified itself in Star Wars lore as perhaps one of the most beloved entries in the franchise. Especially for my generation, the millennials, we kind of grew up with this stuff. In a lot of ways, I think fans liked the Clone Wars for the same reasons why people liked Andor. The Clone Wars really expanded the world of Star Wars and made it feel much more alive and real. The Clone Wars featured a wide diversity of stories, from epic multiple episode space battles to more personal stories featuring Anakin and Padme. It even had political thriller episodes like when Palpatine takes over the banking system. You know, a lot of my content, a lot of my in-depth analysis of the Star Wars universe, it just couldn't be done without the Clone Wars. That is very much the holy grail of Star Wars, at least for this channel. And that's because Clone Wars is really one of the first shows in Star Wars that explained what life was like for the average person living in it. It's something Andor really takes to the next level, but yeah, at the time, the Clone Wars was it. That's what we had. This wasn't really a show that just focused on the heroes. We also got to see how the clones lived. We got to see how the Senate functioned. And of course, the impact the Clone Wars had on all of the innocent civilians caught in the middle of the fighting. One of my favorite stories from the Clone Wars focuses on the Anderonian Civil War and the origin story of Saw Gerrera, one of the key figures in the Rogue One Andorverse. Now that we have a much better understanding of who Saw is and what he becomes, I kind of want to take a look at his origins, and you'll find a lot of similarities between Saw and one of his first mentors, who, believe it or not, is none other than Anakin Skywalker, aka the man who would become Vader. As you get older, you start to realize that pushing through it isn't exactly a healthcare plan. All those annual visits you've missed in the last few years, not a great idea. And that's because taking care of your health not only makes you feel better in the short term, it can really prevent serious problems from arising in the long run. And while finding a good doctor used to feel overwhelming, it really doesn't have to anymore thanks to today's video sponsor, ZocDoc. It's a free website that works like a search engine for trusted, high-quality doctors and specialists. You can filter your search by the type of care you need, your insurance, location, and even availability. And so you're not waiting weeks for help. With ZocDoc, you can click to instantly book an appointment and get access to more than 100,000 healthcare providers across nearly every specialty, from mental health to dental health, eye care to skin care, etc. I've used ZocDoc many times over the years to schedule appointments with specialists in my area, and I really love their reviewing rating system that gives me a better sense of who these doctors are before I actually book an appointment. There are also little quality of life things I really enjoy, like being able to fill out all of your intake paperwork before you actually go to the office through their portal. Stuff like that saves you a lot of time. Plus, ZocDoc appointments happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. You can even score same-day appointments. You don't even have to talk to anyone, just book with a few clicks. So stop putting off these doctor appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/GenerationTech. We've linked it in the description to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. Thank you for your patience, and thank you to ZocDoc for sponsoring us. Now back to the rest of the video. So, Saw Gerrera, taken at face value, is a pretty unlikable individual. He's paranoid, he's violent, he's unpredictable, and a bit insane. His rash actions have resulted in the deaths of innocent civilians and even rebel operators. But I would argue that the Galactic Republic, the Jedi Order, Anakin Skywalker are as much to blame as he is. You see, during the Clone Wars, you had several types of conflicts going on in the Outer Rim where the secessionist movement was the strongest. You had Republic worlds that were fighting against Separatist invasions, you had Republic worlds that just joined the Separatists, and then you had worlds that were like a mix of both and an open civil war. That's what Anderon was. Anderon is located on the edges of Separatist space, and in the beginning of the war, Anderonian monarch King Ramses Dendub refused to side with either side of the conflict. Unfortunately, as we see with other non-aligned planets during the conflict, like Mandalore, there really was no avoiding the conflict, especially if one of the major players wanted you a part of the conflict. And this is because when you gather resources at the galactic level, which is what the Confederacy of Invented Systems did with the droid army, there's really no way that one planet has enough resources to stand up against that type of army. In order to survive, I mean, a neutral planet needs to make alliances. They need to join a larger organization, although Now, in all fairness, Satine Kryze's Council on Neutral Systems didn't really protect Mandalore that well either. So Anderon would be targeted by the Confederacy of Advanced Systems, and it was very easy for them to legitimize this invasion. You see, what they had to do was find a power-hungry opposition leader, which wasn't really that hard. They found this guy called Sanjay Rash, and once the droids quelled any unrest, he just took over. Obviously, he was ruling for the Separatists, but as far as the Anderonians were concerned, things were still relatively normal. The rightful monarch, Ramses Dendup, would be imprisoned. Now, during this time, a small group of Anderonians understood what was happening, and they would actually start a resistance movement against the Separatist droid army. The Anderonians have a famous warrior culture. At one time, they rivaled the Mandalorians in their capabilities on the battlefield. These Anderonians had their ancestors' hearts and spirit with them, but they basically lacked everything else, including military supplies and training. To make matters worse, most of the Anderonian military had stayed loyal to the new regime, and so there was no experience amongst their ranks. But at one point, former Senator Lux Bonteri, the son of Mina Bonteri, joined the Anderonian resistance group as an advisor. Recognizing the problems that this group faced, he would use his former political contacts with Ahsoka Tano to request aid and assistance from the Jedi Council. The Jedi are technically enlisted in the Grand Army of the Republic as leadership or as commanders. But this was never a good match for the Jedi Order, which is not grounded in rules and regulations, but a far more personal connection with an invisible energy field that is supposed to guide them through life. The institutionalization of the Jedi was really just a horrible thing. It's not that the Republic was evil or anything for doing this, it's just that these two types of organizations function in completely different ways. They should have never been paired together in the first place. Putting a semi-religious, spiritual organization in the government or connecting it to the government just isn't a good idea.
Unfortunately, the only way to reclaim Anderon will be through armed struggle. We lack sufficient hardware and supplies.
Anderon is in your king's rule, and at the outbreak of the Clone War, he chose to align it with the Separatists.
Now, Obi-Wan in this conversation becomes the voice of reason, primarily as a reaction to his own master, Qui-Gon Jinn's more rebellious streak growing up. And now, as Anakin Skywalker's master, it's more important than ever that he serves as a good example for the young, hot-headed general. Anakin, in a lot of ways, is very similar to Saw Gerrera, the guy who he kind of champions for his foreign internal defense program.
Our true king has been silenced. The one you recognize as a traitor and a separatist minion. We need your help to survive this.
Find a way. We shall.
See, Saw has that same passion, that same eagerness to solve problems. And after seeing Saw Gerrera talk about their needs, Anakin immediately starts planning an operation. And like all of Anakin's other plans, this plan is really focused on military outcomes and not necessarily the larger political picture, which kind of sounds a lot like Saw Gerrera now that I think about it.
There are pockets of rebels on many of these planets that just need guidance. With training and resources, they could attack soft targets while the Republic continues to engage them on the battlefield.
That sounds like terrorism, Anakin.
Like, Anakin makes it sound like a really good idea. I'm sure if he's telling a bunch of 9-year-old clones, they'll all be like, oh yeah, sure, the enemy of my enemy will definitely be my friend. Whereas old man Obi-Wan Kenobi is like, no, I have experience. I've seen stuff like this go wrong. I don't want to be responsible for something that will most likely become a mess. I mean, the CIA did it to the Mujahideen in the 80s, and in the short term, it was good for us. In the long term, not so much.
Well, I think of it as an insurgency, to help realign these planets with the Republic.
You see, Anakin is already thinking like an Imperial here. He's not here to help the Anderonians out of the goodness of his heart. That's what the young Anakin would have done when he was just a slave on Tatooine. The way that war leader Anakin thinks is very classic big power competition mentality. We saw this happening all across the world during the Clone Wars. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Wakanda, Iran, all the chaos that's happening there today, that's actually America's responsibility. It goes all the way back to the 50s when we toppled over the left-leaning democratically elected PM Mohammad Mazda and replaced him with a brutally incompetent Shah who just happened to hate communism. There's a lesson here about not trusting people just because they have similar political views to you. Anyway, the brutally incompetent Shah did a lot of horrific things, threw a lot of people into prison, killed a lot of people, and that led to a popular revolution by students, which was then sort of co-opted by a much more violent and better organized Islamist group, who themselves had become radicalized by the Shah's violent crackdown on civil liberties. And now Iran is ruled by a backwards, brutal, corrupt Islamic regime that really doesn't help anyone. It definitely doesn't help the region. It doesn't help its neighboring countries. It doesn't help its own people. We're also robbed of Persian culture, one of the most ancient and important cultures humanity has ever, created or evolved. I mean, it's overall a tragedy. And then it's because America, even if we were, we were not well-intentioned in this case. Sometimes we are when we do foreign intervention, but we really messed this up by going into a situation we didn't really understand. A man not all that different from Anakin Skywalker stopped looking at nation states as large groups of living people and saw them instead as assets and pawns that can be won or lost in a conflict with another superpower. It's not that all foreign interventions are bad. It's not that all, military actions are bad. It's just you have to be extremely, extremely careful when you're carrying out these type of operations. I mean, foreign interventions are difficult enough. Carrying out one without a firm understanding of the local culture and dynamics at play is just ridiculous. Training soldiers to fight as insurgents without a plan to disarm them in the future and de-radicalize them is a recipe for disaster. But unfortunately, in this small room where the Jedi are discussing the future of the Anderonians, there's really no one there representing the Anderonians' needs. Instead, what's being talked about is what the Anderonians can give to the Jedi, to the Republic. It's not exactly a very even relationship.
We can divide the Separatist forces and press them on two fronts.
I'm not surprised that Mace Windu buys immediately into this plan. He's more single-mindedly focused on defeating the Separatists than anyone else in this room. And this is why he almost executed Palpatine. This is why he killed Jango Fett, instead of detaining the template for the entire clone army. That might have been important. Despite all of his strengths, his personal discipline, Mace Windu's extreme focus also gave him blinders, tunnel vision. He didn't see the problems he was creating. He didn't see the Anderonians as people, he saw them again as tools and assets to use. And so he agrees with this idea, create a second front, attack the soft underbelly of the Separatists. Sounds great if you're just talking to a bunch of grunts, but these aren't grunts. These are the leadership of the Grand Army of the Republic. They're not thinking about the political ramifications of their actions here. Who are these people the Jedi are arming and training? How can they be trusted? They aren't clones. They aren't even a part of the Republic, let alone enlisted in the military. What happens if these insurgents attack civilians? What happens if they get captured? What happens if they start their own country outside of the rule of the Republic? And attacking soft targets? Well, that sounds a lot like non-military targets or non-fortified military targets, as in logistics centers, cadet training areas, but also, why not government buildings or industrial and manufacturing sites that might have military production but also have commercial production? Things can get messy very quickly. Civilians can get hurt very quickly.
A means to an end. Fear cannot be. Stop those who spread terror. The Jedi must.
So this is really the big problem with the Jedi serving in the Clone Wars. At their core, these individuals are idealists. They don't believe in phrases like a means to an end or
for the greater good.
Call it what you will.
The Jedi believe in a higher power. They believe in the cosmic force. They believe in the light side. And they believe it, blindly. Yes, they do. Like it's said there, like fall into the force, become one with the force. Do not actively participate or try to make decisions. Let the force make the decisions for you. War kills a lot of things, including ideology, especially if you can't compartmentalize the things you see in your brain. This is the true horror that many younger Padawan and even older Jedi Knights faced when they entered the battlefields of the Clone Wars for the first time. It was really a horrific and also genius thing to do, because war and conflict are the ultimate equalizer, right? Like, the battlefield doesn't care if you're rich or you're poor. It doesn't care if you're black or white, gay or straight, man or woman. It kills indiscriminately. It kills Jedi indiscriminately. It kills their ideology. And it leaves everyone just like kind of beaten down and very pragmatic. And so when the Jedi entered the battlefield, many were pushed to their limits for the first time in their life. And you guys saw in Tales of the Jedi the difference between the Jedi's official training and then Anakin's much more sketchy but realistic, let's give my apprentice CTE training. I mean, how many Jedi died on the battlefield standing up for their ideals, right? I think far more actually when pushed into a corner, fell to the dark side, or at least use the dark side, because that's what I would do. Would I rather die or use the dark side? It's an obvious choice. The Jedi are idealists. That's why they wield these antiquated lightsabers instead of a blaster, or I don't know, explode the hearts of the perps they're chasing down. Idealism is why they also wear robes on the battlefield, where there's flying shrapnel everywhere instead of full combat armor. Well, actually, some of the smarter ones, like Anakin and Obi-Wan, at least wore a breastplate. But by their own descriptions of the Force, pragmatism is just not fitting for a Jedi. It's almost too arrogant to try to rationalize how the Force works. You just don't do it. Throughout history, where people see evil, I oftentimes see incompetence or laziness or dolphin-related shenanigans. Anakin is not bad intentioned when he puts his full weight behind this foreign internal defense of Anderon. He actually sees it as a legitimate way to win the war. And it's really this kind of thinking that leads the Jedi into, more and more troubled waters. Like by the end of the conflict, they decide that they need to assassinate Count Dooku for the greater good, Anakin, despite the warnings of Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, is eager to start his pilot program. If he can train insurgents successfully on Anderon, he could probably replicate this across the whole galaxy and hopefully turn the war against the Separatists. And that is very much the problem here. Anakin has thought about stuff only on the short term when concerning the Anderonians. Like Obi-Wan is worried that these Anderonians could become terrorists, so Anakin will train them with mostly anti-droid weapons so that they can't hurt living beings. Which honestly is kind of stupid, because any tactics these fighters learn can easily be used against living beings. More importantly, Anakin is not focused on the long term. Like, what is the end game for putting Saw Gerrera and all these Anderonians into play? Like, are you eventually going to disarm them once the war is over? De-radicalize them, maybe? Because when you become a soldier, when you become a guerrilla fighter, it's tough. You might get PTSD, you might have injuries, you might need healthcare. There are a lot of things you have to think about when you're creating a military force, and that is why we have structures like the Grand Army of the Republic. Those things are relatively taken care of. Actually, Palpatine screws over everyone, but you need this kind of organization, right? And this is not something Anakin is capable of even thinking about as he's putting the Anderonians into play. And so this Anderonian operation is very much, let's train these individuals in tactics and some strategic thinking, and then let's just let them loose and hope for the best.
Now, to be clear, we are not here to fight your war, rather to show you how to conduct it in the most efficient and successful way possible.
So let me translate. We're gonna teach you guys to kill things efficiently, like a Jedi or clone commando, but without any of the mental discipline or belief systems that the Jedi have, without any of the, structure that the clone troopers have. I'm of the opinion that if you train someone to do something very dangerous or dumb, like, try to overthrow the government, you do have some responsibility over them. You kind of have to watch out for them so they don't do anything too dumb. Because war isn't just what you do physically. It's not just about taking the next objective and moving on. It might be for the grunts, but there's always a larger picture, a purpose, a mission. You're doing horrible things. You have to understand why. No one taught Saw Gerrera all the other things, like how to deal with the death of a commander, a sister who in many ways was Saw's better half, Steela, the compassionate and calming voice that was the true leader of this band of revolutionaries. Saw became unbalanced after she passed. At first, it wasn't really noticeable, but when things got tough for Saw's men, when the Empire tried to enlist them into the Stormtrooper Corps and he had to run, things only got worse. Here is a man trained by some of the deadliest warriors in the galaxy, the Jedi, who has all the skills you could possibly want from, elite special forces, but he has no army to fight for, no general to follow. And that's insane. Anakin, in his haste to win the war against the Separatists, never had the time to understand what would happen to all the people he enlisted in the fight. This is never Anakin's strong suit, mind you. How many times has he led his clone troopers into suicidal frontal charges that only a Jedi could possibly survive? Empathy and understanding of others was never Anakin's superpower. Killing and destroying things was. And Saw would learn those skills with amazing proficiency. He would become one of the most ruthless and efficient rebel commanders all throughout the Galactic Civil War. But notice how his organization can never grow. His movement never seems to achieve anything. And that is because, like him, the partisans are stuck in a constant stasis. A side effect of being really hard to kill but having been abandoned by all of your leaders. Saw is basically a loitering munition. When I see Saw, I don't actually think terrorist anymore, especially given the context of how he was created. I'm actually reminded of soldiers, specifically homeless veterans that I see in all the major cities, not just in America, but like all around the world, honestly. Individuals who were celebrated when they're active duty, individuals that were given like millions of dollars worth of equipment, given the responsibility to carry out missions that had life or death consequences. But now that they're older, now that their service is done, a certain percentage of them have fallen through the cracks. They're not taken care of. They have all these skills and abilities that just, they're not relevant in civilized society. And so they're kind of useless. They're left behind and forgotten. And like, especially in the United States, it does bother me a lot because we're the richest republic in the world. You know, we increased our military budget, by the way, by $200 billion, from $800 billion to $1 trillion this year. Imagine what $200 billion could do to the 30,000 or so homeless veterans we have on the streets out there. Well, forget that. Forget $200 billion. That's honestly too much money. We don't even need that much to solve that problem. Take the $90 million that the president is spending for the military parade for his birthday. If we split that $90 million to every homeless veteran out there, it's like $3,000 per veteran, enough to give them food and shelter just for a month. Maybe a percentage of them can get back on their feet because of that. I don't know. It seems like characters like Saw are far more relevant than I realized. At first, I viewed him as this like terrorist, as this revolutionary leader. You know, his name sounds a lot like Che Guevara, but in a lot of ways, when we add the Clone Wars part of his story, we show the world how he was radicalized or how he was kind of turned into a warrior. You get a much bigger view of him, and you start to see him as a victim, honestly, because that's kind of what he is. The Republic completely used him. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.